was for the first time participating in a sacred tradition in his community. He was deer hunting. And in his particular family, that not only meant bringing home meat for the family during the coming winter months, but it was also a chance for him to participate in a ritual of becoming a man. And so he set forth in the woods on that fall morning. When the first shot rang out, the bullet struck a tree next to his face, and the bark fragments from the tree left welts on his face. He thought to himself for a moment, whoa, that was close. And then he took a few more steps. Then the second shot rang out, and it passed over the top of his head, breaking branches above him, pieces of which fell upon him. The third shot didn't hit anything at all. The fourth shot came so close to his head that the percussion from the bullet hurt his ear. At that point, his brain finally concluded that someone thought he was a deer and was shooting at him, and he hit the ground. The other hunter, who had mistaken him for a deer, emptied his gun in his direction. The hunter had never seen his target. He was simply shooting at sounds. Evidently, his theory was, there are deer in there somewhere, and if I just shoot enough lead into the woods, I'm bound to hit something. The young man in the story is a friend of mine, a friend of Tom's, and some of you know him. His name is Ken Davis. And he tells that story in his book, the book that Tom has already mentioned, How to Speak to Youth and Keep Them Awake at the Same Time. Almost everything that I'm going to mention this morning is Ken's material. I want you to understand that. I feel a real commitment to do the best job I can, not in any way to change his particular material. The deer hunting story illustrates a very dangerous and inefficient way to hunt. Yet many speakers apparently adopt a similar philosophy. They think to themselves, as long as I talk long enough, or say enough stuff, or say enough things, I'm bound to communicate something to someone at some time. The fact of the matter is, however, that most communicators, if not all, or most communicators, if not many, or all of them, like the hunter, have no idea where to hit their target. Anthony Campolo has said, poor preaching, and I'm going to add the words poor teaching here, poor preaching is responsible for a lot of poor presentations of the gospel and the loss of a host of opportunities to lead people into the kingdom of God. He goes on to say, I am in no way minimizing relational ministries when I extol the importance of good preaching or teaching. We need effective relational ministries, but we also need persons who can craft good messages that will communicate the gospel with clarity and with effectiveness. I believe that as Christian leaders, we need to commit ourselves to becoming more effective communicators of the gospel for these 5 reasons. Reason number 1, many teens and other people today are searching. The world is full of folks who are searching for something or someone to give them meaning or purpose or hope in their lives. We need only visit the local bookstores in our communities to see the racks of self-help books and courses that people are lining up to purchase. For years, we have also watched with curiosity the growing numbers of cults which promise love and acceptance. And today we stare almost in disbelief at the multitudes who embrace the secular gospels of health and prosperity, and as swelling ranks of disciples follow gurus like Shirley MacLaine who offer power and metaphysical experiences. In the midst of that, our generation of teenagers has more material advantages than any other in history. Through television, films, and live performances, they have access to the best entertainment that Hollywood can offer. However, close observation reveals to us that television, movies, high-tech games, and possessions are not giving our kids what they need and what they want most. In spite of all of their so-called advantages, our kids are taking their lives at an alarming rate. One particular recent study shows that in the past 20 years, 15 to 24-year-olds have had their suicide rate rise by 300%. And approximately 7,000 teenagers kill themselves every year, and another 400,000 teenagers attempt to kill themselves every year. Our children are for a sense of self-worth, and they have a desperate need to be involved. They need to know that someone cares, and they need to be challenged to a deeper relationship with a God who loves them. That is a challenge that faces us. We stand in the gap, so to speak. Our teenagers are receiving conflicting messages from every quarter, and our voice is just one more among many screaming for their attention. I want to illustrate that very briefly and in a rather loud way. I need a volunteer, first of all, who will be sort of our guinea pig. It won't hurt. It'll be kind of fun. Anyone volunteer to do that? Okay. David, will you take him outside and blindfold him, and then bring him back in a moment? We'll call for him then. Tom, when we need him, will you bring him in for us? Sure. Okay. And you can just stay in here as we give directions. When we bring him in, we want you to bring him right in the middle of the room. Okay? I'd like each of you now, as soon as I get out of here. Dave, try and occupy his ears while you're out there too, so he doesn't hear our directions. Okay, what I want each of you to do now is to think of a simple task that you can give. What is his name? Lee. You can give Lee to do that he can do right in this room. It might be go over and set the overhead projector on the floor. It might be go over and pick up two blocks and put them together. Think of a very simple task that you can do. Just get it in your head. Okay, bring them in. Now, when they come in here, we're going to bring him to the middle of the room, Lee, and then I'm just going to give you a signal, and I want everybody to shout your message to him as loud as you can. I want you to try and be heard above the other voices to get Lee to do what the task that you were trying to get him to accomplish. Is that clear? Right in the middle. Then you can step away from it. Okay, twirl him around a little bit. Okay, ready? Tie your shoes. Dave, you take him back out. Yeah, take him back out. We're over. Okay. Let him step by his feet. He's getting into that. He's not very responsive. All the way out. Yeah, so he can't hear again. Okay, what that first step in this little exercise illustrates for us is that many of our teens today, and really represents our teens, our kids, as well as some of our adults, but many of our teens today are surrounded and deluged by a host of conflicting voices, all of which are vying for their time, their commitment, and sometimes their money. And because they're being deluged by different directions, all of whom are doing it in a very eager way and with a lot of enthusiasm, many of our kids have a hard time committing to anything. They go from one thing to another, and they just sort of vacillate back and forth. Most of you who are in the ministry have recognized kids like that in your group. This is so difficult even to get their attention. That's all we want to illustrate in the first step. Now, as we go to the second step, I need to tell you something. Anne was given a message that I gave her, which she was to consider the most vital message in the world. So when she tried to communicate to me, she was trying to communicate that message as though it was a matter of life and death. What would that message be to us as Christians? It'd be the message of the faith, the gospel. Okay? In this next step, we're going to put Anne in the middle of the room, two are not going to be able to touch you. Everyone else, when they give the signal, will continue to try and get Lee to do what he wants him to do. Okay? And you'll be in the middle where you can communicate as close to him as you can. You cannot touch him. All right? Right to his ear. Okay? You cannot touch him. At the same time, we need one more volunteer. Benny? All right. We want you to be in the middle of the room on the other side of him. And you also cannot touch him. Your task this time now is to do everything in your power to keep Lee from doing what Ann is telling him to do. Okay? If Ann tells him to sit down, you tell him to stand up, and you better make sure he stands up. Okay? All right, Ann and Benny, take your place in the room.
Am I what? You told me
What I told
you
you?
should do?
Yes. Yeah, you're trying to do everything you can, Ann, to get him to do that. Everyone else participates as well. Okay. Ready? Go. Kiss. Okay, stop. Okay, take me out again. Take me out again. You two stay right where you are. David,
sounds like a shot market.
this afternoon.
You remind me of being in the grainer James. Fine grain.
All right. Sometimes the second step illustrates how much we have to work at trying to get close to kids in order just to be heard. The first step, Lee, I'm sure, never even heard Ann's message. Did he hear Ann's message this time above the din of the other messages? He did, didn't he? He started following her for a while. And that happens to us. We finally start getting through to a kid, and it looks like they're coming our way, and then something comes up. Satan gets real busy, and he makes sure that they hear a conflicting voice, and then they turn. And you see that? It worked beautifully. It was a beautiful illustration of that. Ann had him going, he was responding, and all of a sudden Benny turned in at the last minute. How many of you had that frustration in your ministry? It happens to me oftentimes.
Benny's hanging around all the time.
Yeah.
Bob will do anything.
Exactly. We work hard at trying to get close to kids just so they'll hear our message. If we simply sit back and expect that they're going to come to us, it oftentimes doesn't. Okay? They're searching, and there's too many other people who are putting lots of energy into giving them an answer, be it a false answer. This is the third and final stage now, the illustration and exercise. And this time, everyone does the same thing, and this time, you alone are allowed to touch him. You can put your arm around him, you can meet him, but you can't pull him or push him. Okay?
Can't pull it.
Can't pull or push, but you can put your arm around him, you can lean him a little bit. Benny, you cannot. You still can only speak. Okay? All right, bring him in, Tom.
But I want to get him.
You want to do everything you can.
But I can talk to him.
Oh, yes. Keep talking to him. You do everything you can now, man. This is your last shot. He's blindfolded.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Go. Kiss me. All right, we can take the blindfold off of Lee now. Lee, can we ask you a couple questions?
Sure, but not all at once.
The first time we brought you into the circle, you just stood there. Why?
The first time? I'm a kind of person that generally has a one-track mind, and I like to only think about one thing at a time. I couldn't think about anything until that time decided to do it.
Couldn't pull out one specific message to respond to that.
Right.
Okay.
I did eventually go with the give me $1, whoever Raleigh at the
What an easy mark.
Suddenly I realized there was only a 5 and a 10 in there.
Okay, the second time you came into the group, you began to follow, by the way, our people in the middle were Ann and Ben. You began to follow Ann almost to the table and then you turned. Why did you begin to follow Ann?
Because she said, turn to your right, turn to your right, and I turned to my right, and she was on the left.
Okay. Okay.
At first she said, follow me, and so I thought, I'll listen to her voice, and then I decided to listen to what she was saying instead of what she was saying.
The last time you followed, why? What was different the last time?
She said, I can touch you, I can guide you, and so just follow me.
There was a personal touch involved, wasn't there? Many times that's what's lacking in our youth ministry, is a personal touch. We communicate our programs, we put out our calendars, we put out our calling trees, but unless one of our kids or one of our youth ministry team members goes and finds out a kid's name and gets close to them, they're not going to hear our message, they're not going to respond to us. There was a young youth director in Denver, Colorado, who had one of the girls in her group converted. And it was kind of a remarkable conversion. So she asked the girl if they could go out to lunch. And she sat down with her at lunch and she said, look, I just want to know, what was the single most important factor in your conversion experience? And this young teenager looked her right in the eye and said, the day you learned my name. We need to really work at getting close to our kids. They're searching for someone to give a meaning and purpose. And we need to take some time and energy to get close to them. And then when we get close enough to them to be heard, then we want to make sure that we're ready as communicators to articulate in a clear and effective way the gospel so that their lives might be changed. Secondly, we want to make sure, we want to commit to being more effective communicators of the gospel because many teens and other people are concluding that Christianity is impractical. A couple of years ago, Ken Davis was polling people, most of whom were teens, as they came out of large youth gatherings and congresses and conventions throughout the country. The results were rather startling. Now, bear in mind, first of all, that most of the people who were speaking at these congresses and conventions were pretty top-notch speakers. That's why they were asked. They're people whom you and I might consider as being rather effective or dynamic, even. And yet the polls show that 70% of the young people and adults who walked out the door following those meetings could not give a clear understanding of what the purpose of the meeting was. Some wrote down objectives entirely different from the speaker's objective. Some wrote down one of the significant points of the subject. But the fact remains that 70% of those kids who left that particular meeting had really no understanding of what the speaker was trying to communicate. One young gal was asked, tell me, what was the speaker like tonight? He was deep. What did he talk about? Deep stuff. What kind of deep stuff? Deep. Those were her actual words. She could not get beyond that. He threw so much at her that she couldn't pull out his objective. He was deer hunting, wasn't he? He was throwing as many bullets into the woods as he could, hoping to hit something. And at least with her, he didn't hit a thing, except that she came away feeling that he was deep. Why? Because she didn't understand his purpose or objective. Even more surprising, perhaps even more distressing, was the discovery that over 50% of these same speakers could not articulate in a single sentence their objective or their purpose for the talk that particular evening. They simply didn't know what they wanted to accomplish in their talk. And not having a clear objective was about as effective as spraying the woods with a whole bunch of bullets. As a result, we have today in our churches, in our youth groups, and in our communities, a whole generation of adults and kids who are walking around thinking that Christianity is not a practical way to live, that it is simply a bunch of vague, obscure, and heavenly concepts that cannot be applied to daily living. They are concluding that Christianity is impractical, and preaching or teaching without a purpose or objective simply reinforces that particular kind of thing. Thirdly, we need to commit ourselves to becoming more effective communicators of the gospel, because there are many youth and adults who are extremely critical listeners. The story is told, I'll say, of an Iowan. I'm a Nebraskan, so I won't use a Nebraskan, but of an Iowan who was accepted to attend Harvard College. And he arrived a few days early before school began, and he registered, he bought his books, and he wanted just to acquaint himself with the campus. The day before classes were ready to begin, however, he still had not located the library. So he walked up to an upperclassman, and he said, "Excuse me, can you tell me where the library is at?" And the upperclassman said, "Oh, at Harvard, we never dangle our participles." And the Iowan thought for a minute. He said, "Let me rephrase my question. Can you tell me where the library is at, jerk?" Now I've substituted a different name. The name of the original joke had a little bit more to do with one's anatomy, but it gets the point across. There are many people in our congregations, including some of our kids, who are very intellectual in their approach to Christianity. They have a very intellectual ear, and incorrect use of grammar or information can become a real stumbling block to them even hearing your message and your objective. A couple of years ago, I was preaching an Easter sunrise service, and I got done with the sermon, and as many of you who have preached before on Easter perhaps have done, I used this common illustration of the butterfly leaving a cocoon as an example of what the resurrection was like. And it was a pretty darn good sermon, I thought. And I was shaking hands with people afterwards, and one of the retired professors from Augsburg, a real saint and pillar of faith in our congregation, came up and put his arm around me and said, "Pastor Glenn, it's a pretty good sermon." I said, "Pretty good." And then, when you think it's really good. It's a pretty good sermon. I said, "But listen, moths come from cocoons. Butterflies come from a chrysalis." Now, because this particular gentleman is such a saint, I doubt that he let that become a stumbling block. But for some people, that could have been a stumbling block. Last August, after now 2 workshops with Ken Davis, and sometimes I think my sermons are getting very clear. I go back, how many of you, when you were, keep your sermons? I hate to throw those buggers away. You may need them again someday. And so when I put them in the file, I always write bad, or good, or excellent. Use it again sometime when you need it. And I've gone back and looked at some of those excellent sermons, in my eyes, from several years ago, from 8 or 10 years ago. I have no idea what I was trying to say. I was talking about things. I was talking about information, but I had no clear objective or purpose for my talk. Now I'm starting to think I've got that. And last summer I preached a sermon. I used to write out every word. I used to preach from a manuscript. And I used to do that because I was scared to death to stand up because I didn't know it well enough. I didn't know what I wanted to say. And I preached this sermon from a 1-page outline, and I think it was dynamite. The next week, I received this letter. Dear Pastor Harless, we enjoyed your sermon on Sunday very much. That was great. But, that's the red flag word. But, we would like to make a friendly suggestion. Please use correct grammar. At least 3 times Sunday, you use subjective pronouns when you should have used objective ones. It gets better. Prepositions require objective pronouns. Hence, you should not say for you and I, but rather for you and me. Another time you said to we Christians. It should have been to us Christians. The third misuse cannot be recalled at the moment, but also involved an incorrect pronoun. Since you work with teenagers so much, it is important that you use correct grammar. You are not alone in using incorrect pronouns. We have heard similar misuse from PhDs and other well-educated persons. Isn't that great? Man, that one kind of took me back. I'll tell you something, though. Chances are that particular couple, after the sermon, could not recall my objective or the main points of my sermon. Why? Because my incorrect use of grammar had provided a real wall to their hearing my message. I'll tell you one thing. I am conscious now about my use of pronouns all the time. In Nebraska, we do that all the time. And up here, for a lot of folks, that is really a roadblock. We need to pay attention to little details in our messages. What may appear to be insignificant points or flaws in our sermons or our talks may in fact prove to be major stumbling blocks for our listeners. Fourthly, as Christian leaders, we need to commit ourselves to becoming more effective communicators of the gospel because there are methods of communication and courses available to us to improve our communication skills. One such method is the method that Ken Davis teaches, and is the method called SCORE. SCORE stands for choosing a subject, choosing a central theme, choosing an objective, choosing rationale, and then your resources, and then your evaluation. Now, SCORE is simply a method of logic. It's just a way for you to go about preparing your talk. I used to sit around for 20 hours or more writing a sermon or a talk. And most of that time, probably 12 to 15 hours of that time, was trying to figure out what I wanted to say. And SCORE helps me get to that point in much more time. That is not to say that it's not hard work. Most people who have a difficult time with SCORE rebel against it because it is hard work. You sit down and you think about what's my subject, what's my central theme, and then the most difficult thing is to come up with what is going to be my objective for this talk. And that, by the way, is where most communicators fail. We've already mentioned it. That's where most sermons fail, is having a clear objective. SCORE looks something like this. I can get it all up here. You begin by choosing a subject. The subject ought to be chosen as something that you know something about. Okay? You don't want to talk in any way about something you have no idea what it is or what you're going to say about it. So choose a subject you're thinking about. It could be love, it could be fish, it could be communicators. Then the next step you need to take is to choose a central theme. Central themes might be love of God, love of neighbor, how to love your kids, how to clean a fish. In my particular talk today, it was how to be a more effective communicator. Finally, and this is where it really gets a little tough, you try and come up with your objective for your talk. First thing you do is you come up with a propositional statement. And then you interrogate that particular statement. My propositional statement was, as Christian leaders, we need to commit ourselves to becoming more effective communicators. Then you interrogate that question. You either ask why or how. Okay? In this case today, I chose to give a why talk. Why? Because of these 5 reasons. And the reasons are my key word. Okay? Then you develop your rationale. The rationale are simply the points of your talk that support your objective. In this case, I had 5 rationale, 5 reasons that support the objective. Then, and when you get this done, your talk is done. You know what I've always admired in pastors or communicators are those people that have basically their sermon done 2 weeks ahead of time. They have their talk done 3 weeks before it's due. They're not staying up all night to do it. And the SCORE method helps you do that. How many of you preach on a regular basis, once a month, twice a month, or give a talk to your kids? Does everybody do that? SCORE will let you know what you're going going to say well in advance. You can put the outline of your talk up on your bulletin board, you can paste it on your desk, and then you can live with it for a week or two. And you come across illustrations or resources or events in your life then which support your rationale. So you read a book and you say, hey, that fits. And you go back to your desk and you write the letter from the congregation under this particular rationale. And then finally, the last step in scoring is you evaluate your talk. Does it hold together? Now, if you go to a workshop like Ken Davis's, you spend the week being grilled on score. You also spend time talking about where to find illustrations, appropriate use of humor, microphones or lighting. He covers all that kind of thing. I think it's really a fine communications course. And undoubtedly, there are others that you may know about, which maybe hear from you as soon as I'm done in just a few minutes. But SCORE is the heart of Ken Davis's communication workshop. And it's something that will take some work if you choose to commit to it. It's also something, however, that I believe, Tom believes, Tim Stark, who also comes to Youth Roundtable but who is not here today, attended, he also is committed to it. Undoubtedly, it will cut your preparation time, I would say, in half, and it will make you more clear and more effective as a communicator. Finally, and very quickly, the last reason that we need to commit ourselves to becoming more effective communicators is because we are ambassadors of the King. When a president chooses an ambassador to represent him in our country, in another country, he chooses someone whom he can trust. He chooses someone who can articulate his policies. He chooses someone who can clearly and effectively communicate a message from him. We have been given the privilege of being ambassadors of the Lord God. And the message that he has entrusted with us is, I believe, and I suspect you share this with me, the most powerful message in the world, and it holds the most potential for changing individual lives other than any other message in the world. That alone ought to motivate us to try and enhance our communication skills. I invite you to consider Davis's workshop or other workshops, or pick up some self-help materials and to examine your communication skills. None of us ever arrive. The day we think we've arrived as communicators is the day we start to die. But I invite you to commit yourselves to becoming more effective communicators of the gospel for the reasons that I've mentioned. Thank you. Sure. Just a word about the brochure. This is the third year that Davis has been doing the week-long workshops. The first year he did two of them, one in Orlando and one in Estes Park, and I attended the one in Estes Park because of the mountains. And then last year, I believe he did 4. And this year, he has 5 workshops planned. And the last one is May 23rd to the 27th here in Minneapolis. The last I heard, it was still scheduled for Bethel, unless they were going to get a better deal somewhere else. You can save $100 by staying at home and commuting. My suggestion to you would be to spend the extra $100 and eat there and benefit from the friendships and the fellowship that you have together. It's an excellent workshop.
How much does it cost?
The cost has gone up this year. I believe it's $425.
It's 60 days in advance.
Yeah. $425 or $450. It's expensive. It's not the thing that you should pay for out of your own pocket. Go to your congregation. Go well in advance. Tell them you want to do this.
You can get college credit.
Yes, and credit costs you a little bit more. If you want college credit, then following the week-long workshop, you have to write, last year at least, the requirements were to write and deliver 3 more talks, which had to be videotaped and critiqued by a couple of other people. Then you submit that to a college in Colorado, which transfers the credits to the institution. Other questions? Tom? You have something to say too.
Glenn's done a really good job. I guess I haven't really gone through his book as well, but this would be one cheaper way to at least look a little bit more into the SCORE method. Glenn has been talking mostly about preaching and talks. I've used the method, I think, pretty effectively to teaching confirmation. And we did a retreat on survival skills in team living. I was talking about reputation. And my objective statement was something to the effect of, it's important that we know what our reputation is, and then also work to improve it. And then I gave a number of rationale below that. And then you plug in different resources, and we had some videos and some music. And the kids, they know just what you're talking about, because you've got your objective statement, and you keep on stating it, like Glenn stated his objective many times throughout this talk today. And the kids know right where you're at. And by using visual aids, by using the board, and even saying point number 1 and point number 2, those kids are with you. And they need those verbal helps to know where you are and what you're presenting. And it also helps in preparing a talk like that, for preparing teaching. Like Don says, you do it weeks in advance. And then as you see materials, there's some good tips on how to have a file system. And as you see a good resource, you may not even know when you'll ever use this, but maybe you'll have a file on love. And you just stuff it in there. Later on, you might pull it out. And you're just always watching and seeing movies and just making little notes to yourself, but you can use it at a later time.
That's good. I've scored retreats also. And I've scored the whole retreat, and we also scored individual sessions. So people know exactly where you're going the whole time. My father's a veterinarian, is going to be giving 5 lectures at a convention in Las Vegas in February. And he was a nervous wreck at Thanksgiving. And he was a nervous wreck because he was worrying about these talks. He had a whole bunch of stuff he wanted to say, but he had no idea how to do it. We sat down one night at a fireplace and in 5 hours scored his 5 talks. And I don't know anything about the information that he's talking about. But I'd say, what do you want to talk about? And he'd say this, and I'd say, why? And that got us talking. And we scored him. I left him with outlines for all 5 of his talks. He was a new man. He enjoyed Christmas. Otherwise, he would have been a real favorite.
Could we get the address as to how to get that
Through
book?
Group Magazine.
Let's do Group Magazine.
Okay, why don't you give it anyway?
Loveland, Colorado. Box 481, Loveland, Colorado, zip code 80539. There's also a telephone number here if you want to order it at home.
What is it?
Area code 303-669-3836. And you can pay by check, Visa, or MasterCard. Local bookstore. I'm sure it's available through local bookstore.
We're respecting the time again. We're just about a little bit after 1, so some of you might want to leave. And if you could bring your dishes back to that fireplace, that'd be helpful too. But some of you may, if you are available, Glenn and Tom, to stay around and chat. How many heard Walton Wangerin last week at Luther Seminary in Hoversten? He is also an effective communicator, and I recommend him to you. A very effective storyteller. He has a number of books as well. You can get it. Well, you can't get any in town right now. They're sold out. But they will be getting them soon. Jim?
Well, yeah, thanks for coming. Next month, we're going to be talking about the idea of fundraising with Crystal Lantern under the title of How to Grow and Not Go Broke. Different research people talking about the pros and cons of fundraising, how to do it, or whether it's right to do it. So kind of a potpourri of ideas and experiences around that topic. What people are talking about. So that'll be next month, how to grow and not go broke. Concept of fundraising as we look toward the UN, because we look toward the summer. So, okay, thanks for coming. That list is not back going around to just one around so we can make sure we get the names. And as Dave said, if you take the dish back, this is a great help. And thanks, Glenn, so much for the work you did on that. Robin, John, your part. See you next month.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Luder College.
I've heard Ken speak a number of times. He's just an unreal. You just walk out of there just going, yeah, and then you go back to church on Sunday.
He's really good.
Oh, going pretty good. That's a good thing.
That's good. You have a junior high in your face.
Yeah.
I get down there, it's close to that every now and then.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Burnsville. Burnsville High, my daughter. So, sounded good. I'll just announce, Carrie is here if anybody wants to talk to her.